Before the story gets buried like the truth almost was, make sure you're subscribed, hit like, and leave a comment. Because cases like this don't want to be forgotten, and someone worked very hard to make sure this one was. The town of Willow Creek, Utah, liked to believe nothing bad ever happened there. Snow fell quietly. Porch lights stayed on late. Neighbors waved, even when they didn't really know each other. It was the kind of place where people trusted routines, trusted families, trusted that evil belonged somewhere else. That illusion shattered the morning Emily Carter didn't show up. Emily was a 28-year-old mother of two. She was careful, predictable, the kind of woman who texted back immediately and never missed a school pickup. When she didn't answer her phone that Monday morning, her friends assumed her battery had died. By noon, they were uneasy. By evening, the unease turned into panic. Her car was still in the driveway. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter. Her winter coat hung neatly by the door. Emily had vanished without a trace. Her husband, Mark Carter, was the one who called police. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as he explained that Emily had gone out the night before and never returned. He said they'd argued. Nothing serious. Just stress. Money. Normal married stuff. But his story already didn't sit right. He claimed Emily left around 11 p.m. for a drive to clear her head. No destination. No jacket. In the middle of a Utah winter. Investigators arrived at the house just after sunset. The place looked staged, like someone had pressed pause midlife. Dinner dishes were washed. The kids' backpacks were lined up by the door. The beds were made. Too neat for a home where a woman had supposedly stormed out in anger. Then came the first crack. A neighbor mentioned seeing Mark loading something into his minivan late that night. Heavy trash bags. Another neighbor said they heard the engine running for a long time, long enough to be noticed. When questioned, Mark said he'd gone out for a midnight drive with the kids to help them sleep. That statement stopped the room cold. Who takes children out at midnight, during a snowstorm? Detectives pulled phone records. Emily's phone stopped pinging at 11:14 p.m. No outgoing calls. No texts. No movement. It was as if the device had simply ceased to exist. But Mark's phone told a different story. Between 12:30 and 4 a.m., his phone traveled miles, far beyond Willow Creek. Remote roads. Backcountry areas. Places with no streetlights, no cameras, and no witnesses. When asked about those locations, Mark shrugged. He couldn't remember. He was tired. Distracted. Grieving. Grieving too quickly, some thought. Friends of Emily began to speak up. They described a marriage that wasn't just stressful, but suffocating. Mark monitored her emails. Controlled finances. Took notes, literal notes, about conversations, about people, about imagined slights. Emily had once confided that she felt watched in her own home. Police searched the house top to bottom. Nothing. No blood. No signs of a struggle. No note. It was the perfect disappearance. Too perfect. Then the investigation widened to Mark's family. His father, Harold Carter, lived just 2 streets away. A man known for being intense, private, and obsessively protective of his son. When questioned, Harold insisted he'd been asleep all night. But cell tower data placed his phone awake and active during the same hours Mark was driving. 2 men. 2 phones. 2 stories. None of them matched. As days passed, the town turned. Search parties combed forests and ravines. Flyers plastered storefronts. Emily's face stared out from every window, smiling in photos taken before fear had entered her life. And then, 1 week later, a detective noticed something strange. During a second search of the Carter home, they found a door in the basement that had been missed the first time. It was locked. Not unusual, until they realized the lock was brand new. Recently installed. The screws still clean. When they forced it open, the room beyond was empty. Except for one thing. A faint chemical smell, and a single spot on the concrete floor that had been scrubbed so hard, the surface itself was damaged. And that's when investigators understood something chilling. Emily didn't just disappear. Someone had planned for her to never be found. The basement told investigators what the town refused to believe. That locked room wasn't storage. It wasn't a hobby space. It was an erasure. Forensic teams returned to the Carter house at dawn, tearing it apart inch by inch. The chemical odor lingering in the basement wasn't random. It was industrial-grade cleaner, the kind used to break down organic matter. Someone hadn't cleaned to tidy up. They'd cleaned to remove something permanent. Mark Carter sat across from detectives that same morning, hands folded, eyes hollow. When asked about the basement lock, he claimed ignorance. Said it must have been there for years. But hardware store receipts told another story. The lock had been purchased 3 days after Emily vanished. 3 days. Not before. Not years ago. After. Police pressed harder. Mark's calm began to crack. His answers looped. Timelines shifted. Details changed. He couldn't remember where he'd driven that night, but he could remember arguing with Emily down to the smallest insult. He insisted she was unstable. Emotional. She talked about leaving, he said. She talked about disappearing. That sentence changed everything. Emily's friends had never heard her say that. But Mark repeated it often, almost rehearsed, like he wanted investigators to believe she'd chosen this fate. Then came the children. During a routine welfare check, a child psychologist noticed something deeply unsettling. Emily's youngest son mentioned a long ride in the dark. So, no music. No talking. When asked who drove, he said, "Daddy." When asked where they went, he shrugged. Daddy said Mommy was sleeping. Sleeping. Detectives froze. Children don't invent details like that. That night, Mark was arrested, not for murder, but for obstruction and child endangerment. It was the only move investigators had without a body. The town gasped. Some neighbors defended him. Others avoided his name entirely. But jail didn't stop the danger. From his cell, Mark made phone calls. Long ones. Coded ones. He spoke to his father more than anyone else. Guards noted how Harold visited weekly, leaning in close, whispering for minutes at a time. Then something terrifying happened. Evidence vanished. A key piece of GPS data, mapping Mark's late-night route, was suddenly corrupted. Search teams revisiting one of the remote areas found fresh tire tracks, but no one could explain how they got there. Someone was going back. Cleaning up. Adjusting the past. Investigators suspected Harold. They searched his home and found disturbing items. Journals filled with obsessive writings about Emily, pages of grievances, detailed observations of her routines. In one entry, he described her as a threat to the family. The threat. When confronted, Harold smiled faintly and said, "Families protect themselves." That same week, Mark was released on bail. Within days, the unthinkable happened. Child Protective Services arrived to remove Emily's children from Mark's custody. Social workers feared for their safety. Police escorts waited outside the house. Mark didn't answer the door. When officers forced entry, they found the house eerily quiet. No furniture disturbed. No signs of panic. The children were gone. So was Mark. A manhunt exploded across state lines. Alerts went out nationwide. Borders were notified. The case shifted from missing person to active crisis. 2 days later, police traced a rental car to a remote location hours away. Smoke was rising. They arrived too late. The house was engulfed in flames. Inside, they found Mark. But what they found with him would haunt the investigation forever. Because the children were there too. And as firefighters pulled the wreckage apart, one truth became horrifyingly clear. Emily's disappearance wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far more devastating. And investigators were about to realize they'd been chasing the wrong ending all along. The fire ended the chase, but it didn't end the questions. When investigators sifted through the ashes, the official conclusion came fast. Mark Carter had taken his own life and the lives of his children. The town clung to the word closure like a life raft. Memorials appeared. News trucks left. People tried to sleep again. But Emily Carter was still missing. No remains. No grave. No final proof. And that silence screamed louder than any confession. 4 months after the fire, detectives reopened every detail of the case, this time without Mark's shadow blocking the light. What emerged was a pattern so carefully constructed it felt almost surgical. Emily hadn't vanished suddenly. She'd been erased in stages, emotionally, socially, legally. Friends recalled how Mark had isolated her, controlled finances, monitored calls, corrected her in public. Quiet things. Invisible things. The kind of abuse that leaves no bruises, only doubt. Investigators revisited the basement one final time. Under a section of newly poured concrete, something Mark had claimed was an old repair, they found microscopic traces. Not enough to confirm a body. Just enough to confirm violence. Enough to say Emily had been there. Hurt there. Possibly killed there. But legally, possibly meant nothing. Harold Carter was questioned again. This time, without his son alive to shield him. He denied everything. Said his journals were misunderstood thoughts. Claimed the phone calls from jail were just a father comforting his child. Then he slipped. During one interview, a detective asked, "Do you think Emily will ever be found?" Harold answered, "No." Too quickly. When pressed, he added quietly, "Some things are meant to disappear." There wasn't enough to charge him. So he walked free. Years passed. Emily's parents aged with the weight of unanswered questions. Her friends moved on but never stopped checking faces in crowds. Every unidentified body in the region reopened the wound. Every tip ended in disappointment. Then, almost a decade later, something surfaced. A hiker deep in the mountains, far beyond the original search zones, found a backpack wedged between rocks. Inside were personal items. A cracked phone, a college sweatshirt, a notebook. Emily's notebook. The entries stopped abruptly. The last page held 3 words, written shakily. "He knows. I'm scared." The discovery reignited the case overnight. Forensics confirmed the items belonged to Emily. The location suggested she'd been alive long after the night she vanished. Long after Mark told police she'd run away. Which meant one thing. Emily had escaped. At least briefly. Investigators theorized she fled during that long drive in the dark. That Mark hadn't been taking her somewhere, he'd been chasing her. The children hadn't been witnesses to murder. They'd been witnesses to a hunt. But if Emily escaped, where did she go? And who found her first? Harold Carter was dead by then. A heart attack. No confession. No answers. The last man who might have known the truth took it with him. The case was officially closed again. This time with a new label. Presumed deceased. But the word presumed lingered. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, a single bouquet appears near the mountain trail where the backpack was found. No note. No name. Just fresh flowers. Rangers say no one ever sees who leaves them. Some believe it's guilt. Others believe it's grief. And a few, quietly, desperately, believe it's something else entirely. Because if Emily Carter survived that night, if she escaped the lies, the control, the violence, then maybe disappearing wasn't the crime. Maybe it was the only way she stayed alive. And somewhere out there, someone knows exactly what happened. They're just still lying about it. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe, because some truths refuse to stay buried.